He had everything, except a reason to live. A lonely rich man in a wheelchair had locked himself away for years until a hungry little boy knocked on his door at midnight and said, "I can help you walk again." If you love stories that restore faith in humanity, please like, subscribe, and share. The Harmattan wind was cold that night. It moved softly around the mansion like a tired visitor that did not want to be seen. The glass windows were clean and wide, the walls were bright, the floors were shiny, but the house still felt empty. Not empty like a room with no furniture, empty like a heart that had stopped expecting anything. Richard Adebayo sat close to the large window in his wheelchair. Outside, the estate was quiet. A streetlight blinked faintly at the gate. Far away, he could see the weak movement of security men changing shifts and a car passing in the distance. The world was still alive. It was just his own world that had become small. His wheelchair was expensive. It had leather, clean metal, smooth wheels. But it still felt like a cage. Sometimes he used to think it was a throne because money could buy anything. But now he knew the truth. A throne was for a king who could stand when he wanted. This one held him down. It reminded him every day that his legs were not his anymore. He stared at the glass and saw his own reflection. A man with grey hair at the edges, tired eyes, a face that had forgotten how to relax. He did not look like someone who had everything. He looked like someone waiting for something that would never come. He tried to remember the sound of laughter in the house. It used to be there. Real laughter. The kind that fills a room without edgeort. His friends used to sit in this same living room, holding drinks, making jokes, talking business, talking life. His wife used to walk around in soft slippers, complaining playfully about how loud they were. Now, when Richard listened, all he heard was the low hum of the air conditioner and the faint tick of the wall clock. Tick, tick, tick. He blinked slowly, and the silence pulled him backward. Back to the day everything changed. It had not started as a tragedy, it started as a normal day. He remembered sitting in his car, feeling important, feeling untouchable. He was rushing. He always rushed. Meetings, calls, contracts, deals. His life used to move fast, like he was chasing something he could never catch. Then the accident happened. One moment he was driving. The next moment there was a loud sound like the world tearing it in half. Metal, glass, smoke, and pain. Pain that swallowed everything. He remembered voices, people shouting, someone calling his name, someone saying, "Hold on." He remembered the hospital smell. Strong disinfectant, white walls, bright lights that never seemed to rest. He remembered waking up and seeing doctors standing over him with faces that looked careful. Careful faces were the worst. They always meant bad news. At first, there was hope. Therapy, treatment, checkups, physio, digerent specialists, digerent hospitals. People telling him, "Let us try again." People telling him, "You are strong." People telling him, "It will get better." And Richard held on to every word like a hungry man holding bread. Then slowly, hope started to die. Not all at once. Small by small. A test that did not improve. A scan that showed nothing new. A doctor who stopped smiling. A nurse who looked away too quickly. A long silence before someone spoke. One day a doctor sat down in front of him and said it plainly. "Sir, your legs may not recover." Richard remembered how the words entered his ears, but his mind refused to accept them. He remembered how he tried to move his toes right there. Nothing. He tried again. Nothing. His chest started to burn, not from pain, but from shame. Not just because he could not walk, but because he felt weak. Because he felt like a man who had been cut down in front of the whole world. He had always been proud. He had built his life with his hands. He had believed nothing could stop him. Now a single day had reduced him to a man who could not even stand up on his own. He looked at the doctor and wanted to ask, "So what do I do now?" But nothing came out. Because the truth was simple. The news did not only break his body, it broke his pride. And from that day, something inside him started to close. That night in the mansion, Richard's eyes returned to the window again. The cold outside pressed against the glass, and deep inside the house, Richard felt the same cold pressing against his heart. He swallowed hard and whispered to the empty room, like the room could answer him. "Is this how my life will end?" The clock kept ticking. Then somewhere in the house, a door shifted slightly with the wind. Richard did not know it yet, but the next part of his life was already walking toward him. Just not in the way he expected. He kept looking at the window, but he was not really seeing the streetlight anymore. He was seeing faces. He was hearing voices that used to fill his house, voices that had once sounded so sure. In the beginning, after the accident, people came. Not one or two, many. They came to the hospital first, then they came to the mansion when he was brought home. They came with soft voices and long prayers. They stood beside his bed and shook their heads like they truly felt his pain. Some were old friends, some were business partners, some were people who had always been around him because his name opened doors. They said things like, "Ah, Richard, God will do it." They said, "You are strong, you will walk again." They said, "Anything you need, call me, anything at all." They brought fruits, they brought expensive drinks, they brought fake hope wrapped in neat packages. At first, Richard held on to them. He needed those visits. He needed to believe he still belonged to the world. Even when he could not stand, he still wanted to feel like the Richard Adebayo everybody knew. But time passed. And people started changing. Not loudly, not with a fight. Just quietly, like a radio being turned down small until the sound disappears. The visits became fewer. The calls reduced. At first he told himself they were busy. People had work. People had families. Life continued. But then he started noticing patterns. Meetings stopped. The same people who used to say, "Richard, come and lead this discussion," now held meetings without him. He would hear about business decisions after they had already been made. Sometimes someone would mention it carelessly, like it was normal. "Oh, we had a small meeting yesterday." Small meeting. Without him. Richard started seeing it clearly. The world was not waiting for him. The world was adjusting itself without him. Calls became rare. Phone calls that used to come in the morning, afternoon, and night now came once in a while. And when they came, they were short. "Hello, sir. How are you today?" "I'm fine." "Okay, sir. Take care." Click. Even the voices changed. People stopped sounding warm. They started sounding careful, like they were talking to a problem they didn't know how to solve. Invitations vanished. Before the accident, his phone used to ring with events. Birthdays, weddings, launches, dinner nights, meetings with politicians, private gatherings where rich men laughed and made plans. Then it became nothing. He would see pictures online, hear gist later. Someone would say it was a nice event. And Richard would sit there in his chair, staring at the wall, understanding what it meant. They moved on. Not because he became a bad person overnight, not because he ogendered them, but because he was no longer useful to them the way he used to be. That was the painful part. Richard began to notice how quickly people stopped pretending when your strength was gone, when you could not show up, when you could not shake hands firmly, when you could not enter a room and make people feel small or important, when you could not ogere opportunities like before. He began to see that many people did not love him. They loved what he could do, what he could give, what his name could open. And once the wheelchair became part of him, once the powerful man became a man people had to help, their interest started dying. That truth entered him like poison. At first, it made him quiet. Then it made him angry. Because he was still Richard Adebayo inside, his mind still worked, his eyes still saw things, he still understood business, he still had ideas. But people treated him like a man whose story had ended, a man to pity, a man to avoid. And that humiliation ate at him. He started snapping at the stage A. He started speaking with a hard voice. He started pushing people away before they could abandon him first. Even Vivian, his wife, tried to stay close then, She tried to talk to him gently. She tried to cheer him up. She tried to remind him that life was still there. But Richard could not hear comfort anymore. All he heard in his head was, "Look at you." So he became bitter, sharp, cold, as if anger could replace strength, as if he stayed hard enough, nobody would see how broken he truly felt. That hardness did not only chase people away outside, it entered his home, and it began to destroy his marriage. Vivian was still there then. Vivian Adebayo was not a weak woman. She was the kind of woman who had stood beside Richard when he was rising. She knew the old Richard well, the confident one, the bold one, the one who used to hold her hand in public like he was proud of her. After the accident, she tried to be the same Vivian. She tried to stay strong for him. In the early days, she visited him in the hospital every day. She sat beside him for long hours. She spoke to doctors, she asked questions, she pushed for therapies, she made sure he ate. When he came home, she tried to make the house feel normal again. She would open the curtains so sunlight could enter. She would play soft music. She would talk about small things, the way people do when they are trying to keep life from turning it into a funeral. But Richard was not hearing her love. He was hearing pity. He was hearing, "You are no longer the man you used to be." And every time Vivian tried to help, it became an argument. If she adjusted his wheelchair, he would snap. "Leave it, I can do it." If she tried to support him as he moved from the chair to the bed, he would push her hand away. "Don't touch me like that." If she suggested he rest, he would accuse her of treating him like a child. If she suggested another doctor, another hospital, another specialist, he would shout that she was wasting money and wasting his time. Sometimes she would say something simple like, "Let me bring your food." And Richard would answer like she insulted him. "Do you think I'm helpless?" Little things became big fights. Not because Vivian wanted to fight, but because Richard's pride was hurting and he did not know where to put the pain. So he poured it on the person closest to him. At night, when Vivian would try to talk, Richard would turn his face away. When she cried, he would act like he did not see it. When she begged him to stop shutting her out, he would tell her she should stop disturbing him. Slowly, the house changed again. Not just quiet like before. Now it became tense. Like two people living inside the same space, but walking carefully around each other like they were stepping on broken glass. Vivian started to look tired. Not tired from work. Tired from love that was not being received. Tired from trying to save a man who had decided he did not want to be saved. There were days she sat on the edge of the bed and stared at Richard like she did not recognize him. Because the Richard she married was still alive. But he was not present. After some years, she tried one last time. She sat with him in the living room, her voice low and shaking. "Richard, you are punishing me for what happened to you." Richard's eyes were cold. Vivian continued, swallowing hard. "I did not cause the accident. I did not take your legs. But every day you make me pay for it. You don't talk to me. You don't hold me. You don't even look at me like your wife again." Richard did not soften. Instead, he laughed, but it was not a happy laugh. It was the kind of laugh that meant, "You don't understand anything." Vivian's eyes filled with tears. She nodded slowly, like she had finally accepted something. And after that, things began to end. Not with one big fight, but with distance. She started sleeping facing the other side. She stopped trying to fix the air between them. She stopped begging him to go outside. She stopped bringing up hope, because hope was now something that agendaed him. Then one day, she told him she was leaving. Richard acted like he did not care. But inside, something in him shook. Vivian said it quietly. "I cannot live like this anymore. I'm not your enemy, Richard, but you have made me feel like one." Then she said the word that made everything final. Divorce. When she left, the house became even quieter. Not the quiet of night, the quiet of a life that had been abandoned. Richard sat in his wheelchair and stared at the door long after it closed. He did not cry. He had stopped crying a long time ago, but he felt something snap inside him, like the last rope holding him to life had been cut. And now, truly, he was alone. The days after Vivian left were long and colorless. Morning came, afternoon passed, night returned, and nothing changed. Richard sat in the same places, ate because his body demanded it, slept because the darkness forced his eyes shut. The only person who still tried to reach him was his mother. Her name was Mrs. Eunice Adebayo. Eunice was already in her late 60s then. She was not the type of woman that begged anybody, not even her own child. She was proud, strong, used to being respected, used to being listened to. Richard was her only son, and she had carried him through many seasons of life. When the accident happened, she came quickly. She cried the way only a mother cries when she sees her child broken. She prayed. She called pastors. She called doctors. She OJ'd money. She OJ'd anything that could help. And when Richard came home, she kept coming. At first, her visits felt like comfort. She would sit beside him and rub his shoulder gently. "My son," she would say, "you are still alive. Do not bury yourself." But with time, those visits became painful, because Eunice was watching her son fade in front of her eyes, and she did not know how to pull him back. Each time she came, she met the same cold wall. Richard barely spoke. Sometimes he answered her with one word. Sometimes he did not answer at all. Eunice would try to make conversation. She would talk about family. She would talk about old memories. She would talk about small things, hoping something would touch him. Then she would plead. "Richard, please, you cannot live like this. Look at the house. Look at yourself. Find light again. Go outside. Speak to people. Smile small." Richard would stare at her like she was talking nonsense. And when she pushed too much, he would shut her down with silence and pride. He did not shout at her the way he used to shout at Vivian. No. With his mother, he used another weapon. Quietness. He would look away. He would pretend not to hear. He would act like her words were not important enough to enter his heart. That quietness hurt Eunice more than shouting, because it made her feel like she had lost her son while he was still breathing. So her visits reduced, not because she stopped loving him, but because each visit left her leaving with a deeper pain. Each time she walked out of the mansion gate, her shoulders looked heavier. Her eyes looked older. Sometimes she would sit in her car for a while before driving OJ, as if she needed to gather strength to face her own sadness. After a while, she stopped coming often, and Richard did not stop her. He told himself he did not need anybody. But deep down, another part of him understood what was happening. People were leaving again. Even his mother. Now they barely spoke. Short calls, long pauses. A call would come. "Richard? How are you?" "I'm fine." Silence would sit between them, like a third person. Then Eunice would sigh softly. "Try and eat. Okay?" More silence. Then the call would end without warmth. Richard told himself it did not matter. But nights like this, Harmattan night, he would sit by the window and feel the house pressing on him like a heavy cloth. Late that same night, when the clock had already passed midnight, something happened. A gentle knock came at the side door. Not the main entrance. The smaller door that servants and stagiaires used. Richard froze. He turned his head slowly, listening. Another knock came. Soft. Then another. Gentle but steady. Like someone refusing to let him stay buried in silence. Richard's first thought was to ignore it. Who would come at this time? No friends came again. No relatives came like before. Even his mother did not come. He sat still, hoping the person would go away. But the knocking continued. Not loud. Not violent. Just patient. As if the person outside believed someone inside was still worth waking up. Richard's heart started beating faster, not from fear, but from something he had not felt in a long time. Curiosity. With a tired sigh, he placed his hands on the wheels and pushed himself forward. The mansion was dark, lit only by small wall lights that made long shadows stretch across the floor. His wheelchair moved quietly, but in the silence, even that small sound felt loud. He wheeled down the corridor. Past cold rooms, past framed pictures he no longer looked at, past spaces that once held life. The knocking came again. Richard reached the side door and stopped. He held the handle for a moment, breathing slowly, as if he was preparing to meet trouble. Then he opened it. Cold air rushed in immediately, sharp and dry, carrying the smell of dust and harmattan. Richard blinked once as the porch light fell on the person standing outside. A tiny boy. Small body, thin shoulders, shivering like a leaf. His name was Zion Okafor. He was 6 years old. He stood there in torn clothes that looked like they had been washed too many times and still could not become clean again. His slippers were worn, almost flat, and one of them looked like it could snap at any moment. His hair was rough and uncombed, and there was dust clinging to the edges of his face. But what caught Richard was not the clothes. It was the eyes. Big eyes, clear eyes, eyes that looked too brave for a child that small. Zion looked up at Richard and swallowed. Then he spoke quietly, his voice trembling a little from the cold, but steady. "Sir, please, do you have leftovers?" Richard did not answer immediately. He just stared. Not because he did not understand, but because it felt strange. A child standing at his door at midnight. A poor child. And not begging with drama, not crying, not shaking a bowl. Just asking, like he had gathered courage and decided to use it carefully. Richard cleared his throat. "Leftovers?" he repeated, as if to confirm what he heard. "Yes, sir," Zion said quickly. "Anything, just small." Richard felt something tight in his chest. He was used to people looking at him with calculation. Even when they pretended to be kind, he could see it in their eyes. But this boy was not looking at his house like he wanted to enter and take. He was looking at Richard like he was looking at a person. Not a rich man. Not a man in a wheelchair. Just a person who might help. Richard's hands tightened slightly on the door handle. "Where is your mother?" he asked, his voice low. Zion hesitated, then pointed across the road into the darkness. "We live over there," he said. "My mummy is not home yet. She works late." Richard followed the direction with his eyes. And for the first time in a long time, he noticed something he had ignored for years. Across the road, not too far from his mansion, there were old flats, crowded blocks, small rooms, dim lights, clothes hanging outside like tired flags. He had been living in his own quiet prison for so long that he had not paid attention to the life close to him. Richard looked back at the boy. Zion was still shivering. His lips were beginning to look pale. Richard's pride tried to speak first. It told him, "This is not your problem." But something else spoke louder. A simple human thing. Richard opened the door wider. "Come in," he said. Zion's eyes widened slightly, like he did not expect it to be that easy. "Thank you, sir," he whispered. He stepped inside carefully, like someone walking into a place he was not sure he was allowed to breathe in. The warmth of the house hit him. His shoulders relaxed a little, but his eyes kept moving around. The living room was large, the furniture was expensive, everything looked clean and perfect. Yet Zion did not look greedy. He did not run around. He did not start touching things. He just stood, holding his hands together, waiting. Richard wheeled forward. "Sit," he said, pointing to a chair close by. Zion sat at the edge, not fully relaxing into it, like he was afraid the chair might reject him. Richard wheeled into the kitchen and returned with a covered plate and a small container of food. Leftover food from earlier. In his life, Richard had thrown food away without thinking. But tonight, the same food looked like something important. He placed it in front of Zion. Zion stared at it. Then his small hands came together like he wanted to pray, but he stopped and just nodded quickly. "Thank you, sir," he said again, softer this time. Richard expected him to grab it immediately, to eat like a child that had been starving. But Zion did not rush. He opened the cover slowly. He looked at the food with a kind of respect, like it was a gift. Then he took a small bite. Not messy, not wild. Just careful. Richard watched him, and something inside him shifted. He did not know why. Maybe it was because the boy's hunger was real, but his manners were still there. Maybe it was because nobody had sat in his house like this in a long time, eating quietly, not pretending, not performing. Zion took another small bite, then looked up suddenly. His eyes met Richard's. "Sir," Zion said. "Yes," Richard replied. Zion hesitated like he was choosing his words properly. "Can I help you?" Richard frowned slightly. "Help me how?" Zion glanced down at the wheelchair and then back at Richard's face, as if he was checking if Richard would be angry. "Can I help you so you will not be sad?" Zion asked. Richard let out a small laugh, dry and surprised. "A small boy like you?" he asked. "How will you help me?" Zion's face did not change. He did not smile back. He did not look ashamed. He just spoke plainly, like he was saying something obvious. "I can help you walk again." Richard's laugh stopped. The words hung in the air like a light that refused to go OJ. For a moment, Richard felt irritation rise in him, fast and hot. Because that sentence sounded like a joke. And Richard's life was not a joke. He had paid doctors. He had traveled. He had tried treatments. He had sutured. He had accepted a kind of death while still breathing. So to hear a child say it so easily almost felt insulting. But Zion's face was serious. His eyes were steady. No mocking. No playing. Just belief. Richard stared at the boy for a long moment, trying to understand if this was a child's imagination or something else. Zion held his gaze without fear. And in that moment, Richard felt something he had not felt in years. Not hope exactly, but a small disturbance inside his emptiness, like someone knocking gently on a locked door. Richard kept staring at Zion as if the boy had spoken a language he did not understand. "I can help you walk again." The words sounded impossible. They sounded childish. They sounded like something people said in films. Richard leaned back slightly in his wheelchair, his face tightening. "Do you know what you are saying?" he asked slowly. Zion nodded. "Yes, sir." Richard wanted to laugh again, but it did not come out this time. He looked at the boy's small hands, the torn clothes, the careful way he ate. This was not a child trying to impress him. This was not a child trying to joke. This was a child that truly believed what he was saying. "How?" Richard asked, his voice lower now. Zion swallowed, then spoke with the simple seriousness of a child. "My mummy always tells me something," he said. "She says love and kindness can heal. She says when you help someone, God can help you too." Richard's throat felt dry. Love and kindness. He had heard those words before, long ago, when he was younger, when he still believed in simple things. But life had taught him another language, a harder one. Richard's mind began to argue inside him. Doctors had failed. Not small doctors, the best he could reach. People with big titles, people who spoke confidently and still could not change anything. Money had failed too. He had paid for treatments that could buy houses. He had traveled. He had tried new therapies. He had tried old ones. He had done exercises until his arms hurt and his chest burned. Everything failed. His legs stayed silent. So what was this boy saying? Richard stared at the window for 1 second, then back at Zion. "Zion," he said, tasting the name like he was trying to place it. "My legs have been like this for 20 years. Zion nodded again, like that did not scare him. "I know, sir," he said quietly, "but I still believe." That was what disturbed Richard. Not the words, the certainty. It was stubborn and clean, like a child's faith that had not been stained by disappointment yet. Richard felt something in his chest shift again, small but real. Not a miracle. Not sudden joy. Just movement. As if something dead inside him heard Zion and turned its head. Richard tightened his jaw, as if to stop himself from falling into foolish hope. "All right," he said at last. Zion's eyes widened immediately. Richard continued quickly, before his own heart could betray him. I will agree, but not because I believe you can do anything. Zion listened quietly. Richard pointed at the food. I'm agreeing because you are hungry, because you are small, because it is late and cold. That is all. Zion did not argue. He only smiled, and the smile was warm in a way that made Richard uncomfortable. Thank you, sir, Zion said softly. After Zion finished eating, Richard gave him more to take home. Zion held the container like it was a treasure. At the door, he looked up at Richard again. Good night, sir, he said. Richard nodded. Good night. Zion stepped out into the cold and disappeared into the night, moving quickly like a child who knew he must not waste time outside. Richard closed the door and remained there for a moment. The house was still quiet, but it did not feel exactly the same. He wheeled back into the living room and sat near the window again. His eyes went to the place Zion had sat. And without understanding why, Richard felt a strange tightness in his chest, like something was beginning to wake up. Morning came. The sun rose pale behind Harmattan dust, and the mansion returned to its neat, cold routine. Richard was still in the living room when the gate opened and footsteps entered the house. His longtime housekeeper arrived. Her name was Mama Bose. Mama Bose had worked in Richard's house for many years. She was older, in her late 50s, strong-bodied, neat, always moving like someone who knew her place in the home. She had been with the family long enough to speak with familiarity. She also carried certain beliefs that had grown hard inside her over time. She greeted Richard with respect. Good morning, sir. Richard nodded. Good morning. As she arranged things, Richard mentioned it, not as a big discussion, just as something that happened. A boy came here last night, he said. Mama Bose paused. A boy? She repeated, turning quickly. Richard explained in short sentences. A small boy, hungry, asked for leftovers. His name was Zion, lives across the road, came late. He gave him food. Mama Bose's face changed as Richard spoke. Her mouth tightened. Her eyes became sharp. Ah, she said, that side? Richard frowned slightly. What do you mean, that side? Mama Bose shook her head like someone who had seen trouble before. Sir, those people from that poor side, she said, lowering her voice, they are not simple. They know rich people throw food. Today it is leftover. Tomorrow it will be money. Next tomorrow it will be your property. Richard's stomach turned. He did not like the way she said it with confidence. Mama Bose, he said, he is a child. Mama Bose gave a small, stubborn laugh, not happy. Children are used, sir, she replied. It is the easiest way. They will send him again and again. Then they will bring the mother. Then they will start telling you sad stories. Before you know, they will enter your life. Richard stared at her. The boy's face flashed in his mind. The eyes, the quiet voice, the careful eating. He felt anger rise. Not loud anger. The cold kind. Are you saying he came to trick me? Richard asked. Mama Bose lifted her shoulders slightly. Sir, I am only telling you the truth, she said. People from that area, they don't come here for nothing. They will want to exploit you. The word hit Richard's ear and stayed there. Exploit. Like Zion was already guilty. Like poverty was a crime. Richard felt disturbed, not only by what Mama Bose said, but by how normal she sounded saying it. Like this kind of suspicion was ordinary. Like this kind of judgment was wisdom. And the worst part was this. Mama Bose was someone he trusted. Someone who had been in his house for years. So why did her words feel like they carried something ugly underneath? Richard looked away slowly, his hands gripping the arms of his wheelchair. He did not answer Mama Bose immediately. But inside him, something tightened. Because now, even a small boy with hungry eyes had already been placed inside a box. And Richard was beginning to wonder how many boxes he himself had lived inside without noticing. He stayed quiet after Mama Bose left the living room. The housekeeper's words did not leave his head. They sat there like dust, refusing to settle. Even when he tried to push them away, they returned again. because they sounded like something society had taught people to accept as normal. Richard sat by the window for a long time, his mind heavy. Then later that day, there was another knock. Not loud, not rushed, just light and familiar. Richard's heart reacted before his mind did. He wheeled himself toward the side door again, moving faster than he had moved the night before. When he opened it, the same small boy stood there. Zion Okafor. This time, Zion's face was bright, like he had come carrying good news. He held something carefully in his hand. A small flower. It was not fresh like something bought in a shop. It was simple, slightly bent, and wrapped in a small piece of paper that looked like it came from an old notebook or newspaper. Zion lifted it up proudly. "Sir," he said, smiling, "this is thank you." Richard blinked. He stared at the flower, then at the boy. "For me?" Richard asked. Zion nodded quickly. "Yes, sir, you helped me, so I brought thank you." Richard took it slowly. The petals were soft, the stem thin. The gift was small, but it landed in his hands with a strange weight, like it carried meaning money could not buy. Richard did not know what to say immediately, so he just nodded. "Thank you," he said, his voice quieter than he intended. Zion's smile widened, like that was the best thing he could hear. Richard opened the door wider again. "Come in," he said. Zion stepped in like before, but this time he looked less afraid of the space. He still did not touch anything, still did not roam, but he was not as tense. It was as if he had decided the house was not going to swallow him. Richard wheeled into the living room with him. Zion sat down, then looked around the room again, his eyes moving across the quiet beauty of the place. Then he turned back to Richard, like he remembered something important. "Sir," Zion asked, polite and direct, "how long have your legs been like this?" Richard paused. He didn't like that question from adults. Adults asked it with pity, like they were looking at something broken. But Zion's voice did not carry pity. It carried plain curiosity, like a child trying to understand the world. 20 years, Richard answered. Zion's small mouth opened slightly. 20? He repeated softly, like he was counting it in his head. Richard nodded once. Zion looked down at Richard's legs, then back up. "Sir," he said carefully, "can I touch your knee?" Richard's brows lifted a little. He almost laughed, not mocking, just surprised. "Why?" Richard asked. Zion's eyes stayed serious. "Because I want to help," he said. "I want to send love, like I told you." Richard stared at him, half amused because it sounded like a child's idea, half curious because Zion's seriousness did not look like play. Richard exhaled slowly. "All right," he said. "You can." Zion moved closer, stepping softly like he was entering a sacred place. Then he placed his small hand gently on Richard's knee. The touch was light. Richard expected to feel nothing. Or maybe to feel irritation. Or maybe to feel that familiar bitterness rise again. But what came was degerrent. Not pain. Not sensation in his legs. Instead, a warm calm spread through his chest. It was sudden and quiet, like hot tea entering a cold body. Richard's shoulders dropped a little without him meaning to. His throat tightened slightly. He did not know why. He looked down at Zion's hand on his knee and felt, for the first time in a long time, something soften inside him. Zion looked up. "Sir," he said gently, "it will start small." Richard did not answer immediately. He just held the flower in one hand and watched this boy like he was watching something he couldn't explain. Across the road, in one of the old flats Richard had never really noticed, Ifeoma Okafor returned home late that night. Ifeoma was Zion's mother. She was in her early 30s, a slim Nigerian woman with tired eyes and a body that always looked like it was carrying too much. Life had not been kind to her, but she had learned to stand strong because she had no choice. She was a single mother, and Zion was her only child. When she entered their small room, she was still wearing her work clothes. Dust clung to her sandals, her shoulders were tight with fatigue. She was about to drop her bag when her eyes caught something on the table. A container. Food. Real food. Ifeoma froze. Her tiredness disappeared like someone poured cold water on her. Zion, she called sharply. The boy came out quickly, already knowing from her voice that something was wrong. Mummy, he said. Ifeoma pointed at the food. Where did you get this? Zion hesitated, then answered. From the big house, he said quietly, the man in the wheelchair, Sir Richard. Ifeoma's heart jumped hard. Her face changed. Fear rose fast, the kind of fear that comes from knowing the world too well. Zion, she snapped, stepping closer, you went to someone's house? Zion nodded slowly. I was hungry, Mummy. Ifeoma grabbed his shoulders, not to hurt him, but to hold him steady. Did anybody touch you? She demanded. Did anybody frighten you? Did anybody ask you strange questions? Zion's eyes widened. No, Mummy, he said quickly. He only gave me food. He listened to me. He was nice. Ifeoma's breath came out shaky. She did not relax. Are you sure? She pressed again. Did he call you inside? Did he lock door? Did he do anything that made you feel scared? No, Mummy, Zion repeated, even more softly now. He didn't do anything. He just talked, and I touched his knee today. Ifeoma went still. His knee? She asked, her voice dropping. Zion nodded. He said I can touch it. I want to help him walk again. For a second, Ifeoma could not speak. Her fear deepened, not because she thought Zion was lying, but because she knew how the world was. She knew how stories started. She knew how people twisted things. She knew how quickly a poor woman could be blamed, shamed, or crushed, especially when her child crossed into a rich man's life. She pulled Zion into her arms tightly, holding him like she could protect him from every danger with her body. Zion, she whispered, her voice shaking now, you don't go to strangers' houses again. Do you hear me? Zion nodded against her chest. Ifeoma closed her eyes. In her mind, fear was already running ahead, showing her all the things that could go wrong. Because she had lived long enough to know this truth. Sometimes danger does not come with a loud face. Sometimes it comes with kindness. Ifeoma did not sleep well that night. Even when her body was tired, her mind refused to rest. She lay on the thin mattress in their small room, listening to the night sounds outside. Distant generators, a barking dog, a motorbike passing late. But inside her head, she kept seeing Zion standing at a rich man's door. She kept hearing her son say, he listened to me. And instead of comfort, it brought fear. Because Ifeoma had lived long enough to know that poor people did not get the benefit of the doubt. A small misunderstanding could become a big problem. A kind act could become a twisted story. By morning, her fear had turned into decision. She woke up early, washed her face quickly, tied her scarf, and left the house with her heart beating hard. She crossed the road like a storm. When she reached the mansion gate, the place looked even bigger in daylight. Tall walls, clean compound, security camera watching, silence sitting on wealth like a crown. Ifeoma knocked. Disitter. Again. A guard came out, surprised by her energy, but she did not care. Her eyes were sharp. I want to see Richard Adebayo, she said. Inside, Richard heard the commotion. By the time she was brought to the front, she was already standing with her shoulders high, hands tight at her sides, the look of a woman ready to fight for her child. Richard wheeled himself forward and saw her. A slender woman, dark eyes, a face that looked tired but not weak. The fear in her expression was raw. Before Richard could speak, Ifeoma spoke first. You are Richard Adebayo, she demanded, her voice shaking with anger and fear mixed together. What did you do with my child last night? Richard froze. For a second he felt insult rise. Then he saw her eyes properly. This was not pride. This was terror. The kind only a mother carries. Richard's hands tightened on his wheelchair armrest, then he forced himself to breathe slowly. Madam, he said calmly, please come inside. Ifeoma did not move. I will stand here, she said. Answer me. Richard nodded once. All right, he said. Your son, Zion, came to my side door late at night. He said he was hungry and asked for leftovers. I gave him food. I asked where he lived. He told me. That is all. Ifeoma's eyes searched his face like she was looking for lies. Richard continued, keeping his voice steady. He came again yesterday with a flower. He asked about my legs. He asked if he could touch my knee. I allowed it. Nothing else happened. Ifeoma's throat worked like she was swallowing something heavy. You allowed him to touch you, she asked, her voice lower now. Yes, Richard answered. A silence fell. Then Ifeoma's face changed, not softer but deeper, like she was carrying a long story inside her chest and she had finally reached the place where it poured out. Do you know how the world is? She asked him, her voice trembling now, not with anger but with pain. Do you know what people say when a poor woman's child enters a rich man's house? Do you know how quickly they twist things? How quickly they will point at me and say I sent him to plan something? Richard's eyes held on her. Ifeoma continued, the words coming faster now. They will not ask if you were kind. They will not ask if my child was hungry. They will only see a poor woman and say she is looking for trouble. They will only see my son and say he was used. Her eyes shone with something close to tears, but she blinked them back quickly. I have sojourned too much to lose my child to a world that does not care, she said, voice breaking slightly. So I came here to see you with my own eyes. Richard's chest tightened. He nodded slowly. I understand, he said quietly. Ifeoma took a breath. If you truly did nothing wrong, she said, then Zion will only return here if I am present, if I am standing there, if I feel safe. Do you agree? Richard answered immediately. Yes, he said, so fast that Ifeoma blinked. Richard's voice was calm but firm. I agree because I don't want fear inside my home anymore, he said. Not for you, not for your son, not for me. Ifeoma held his gaze. Then she nodded once, sharp and final, like a contract. Okay, she said. She turned and left. That evening, Ifeoma returned with Zion. Zion held her hand as they walked toward the gate, his face bright, but his steps smaller now, like he could feel his mother's tension. Ifeoma's heart was pounding, but her face stayed controlled. The gate area was quiet until a car slowed down nearby. A luxury car. The window rolled down and a woman leaned out, dressed in expensive clothes, eyes full of contempt like it was perfume. Her name was Mrs. Damola Benson. She was Richard's wealthy neighbor, the kind of woman who enjoyed watching people struggle because it reminded her she was above them. Mrs. Benson looked at Ifeoma and Zion, then laughed loudly, making sure her voice carried. She mocked. So it has reached like this. Richard Adebayo is now sharing his house with street people. Ifeoma's hand tightened around Zion's. Mrs. Benson continued, smiling cruelly. See them, coming like they own the place. Next thing now, they will start claiming inheritance. Some people walking nearby slowed down. Other residents stared. Whispers rose, low but sharp. Ifeoma heard it all. Her ears burned. Her pride trembled. But she refused to let Zion see her break. She lifted her chin. She did not reply Mrs. Benson. She simply walked forward, steady, like a woman walking through rain without running. Zion looked up at her, confused by the tension, but she squeezed his hand gently as if to say, I'm here. The gate opened. They entered. And when Richard saw them from inside the house, something in his face softened. He had prepared. Not just the room. Something deeper. The living room chairs were arranged neatly, facing each other like a real meeting. A pot of tea sat on the table, still steaming. There were small snacks, simple biscuits and small pastries, placed as if he wanted them to feel welcomed, not tolerated. Richard wheeled forward. Ifeoma, he said, using her name carefully, showing he remembered it. Zion, you're welcome. Zion smiled, relieved. Good evening, sir, Zion said. Good evening, Richard replied. Ifeoma sat slowly, her eyes still alert, scanning, checking corners, checking doors, checking the feeling of the house itself. Richard noticed and did not take Oyense. He waited until they settled. Then he spoke. Not in a proud way. Not in a dramatic way. Just with truth that sounded tired. This house is too big, he admitted. And it has been too quiet for too long. Ifeoma watched him closely. Richard continued, his eyes on the tea for a moment, then lifting again. I have been alone, he said. Even when people were around me, I was alone. People don't stay. Stage A don't stay. Everybody finds a reason to leave. His voice dropped slightly. Zion, your son. He came here hungry, yes. But he also came with something else. Richard looked at Zion briefly. He came with life, Richard said. He spoke to me like I was a human being. He made me feel something. Ifeoma's throat tightened. Richard's hand rested on his wheelchair armrest. I won't lie to you, he said. I am lonely. This house feels like a grave sometimes. Silence filled the room. Zion looked between them, not fully understanding everything, but sensing the weight. Richard's voice became gentler. So I want to ask you something, he said, not as beggars, not as people I'm pitying, as people I want in my life. Ifeoma's eyes narrowed slightly. Richard took a breath. I want to invite you and Zion to stay here, he said, temporarily, until your life becomes more stable. I'm not asking for anything dirty. I'm not asking for anything hidden. I'm asking for company, for family, for peace. Ifeoma's chest rose and fell slowly. Pride and survival wrestled inside her. She imagined food that did not finish in one bite. A safe room for Zion. A place where he did not have to shiver. But she also imagined insults. Rumors. People calling her names. She sat very still, fighting with herself. Then she spoke carefully. If I agree, she said, voice low but firm, I have conditions. Richard nodded quickly. Say them. Ifeoma lifted one finger. First, Zion comes first, always. Richard nodded immediately. Agreed. Second, Ifeoma continued, I will work. I will manage the house. I will not be a freeloader. Nobody will point at me and say I came here to eat free money. Richard nodded again. Agreed. Ifeoma's voice shook slightly, but she held it steady. Third, she said, if one day you want us gone, you tell me directly. Not through stage A, not through insults, not through silence. You tell me, and we will leave with our dignity. Richard's eyes stayed on her. Then he spoke softly, like an oath. I promise, he said, if I ever want you to leave, you will hear it from me. And as long as you are in this house, you will be safe here. Ifeoma breathed out slowly. Zion squeezed her hand, hopeful. Ifeoma looked at Richard one last time. Then she nodded. Okay, she said. And just like that, the mansion that had been a grave for years opened its door to a new kind of life. One built not on wealth, but on fragile trust. At first, it was small things. A degerrent sound in the hallway. A child's footsteps. The smell of food that wasn't eaten in silence. Zion's voice filling rooms that had only known echoes. But the world outside the gate did not stay quiet for long. Gossip spread like Harmattan fire. It moved fast and it moved dirty. People whispered at the estate gate. People whispered at shops. People whispered on phone calls that began as, I'm just checking on you, and ended as, be careful. Anonymous letters started appearing. Some were pushed under the gate, some were left near the driveway like they were daring the house to notice. The words inside were cruel. They will finish you. They came for your money. Open your eyes. Then the calls started. Unknown numbers. Voices that did not introduce themselves. Threats said casually, like normal conversation. Ifeoma would pick up and hear breathing, then a low voice. Tell your son to leave that house. Sometimes the line would cut before she could speak. Sometimes they would laugh and drop it like it was nothing. Richard's old associates began to avoid him again. Men who once sat at his table, ate his food, praised his name. Now they crossed the road when they saw his car. Some sent messages pretending it was advice. Richard, you're making a mistake. You don't know those people. This is not your class. Richard read those messages and felt something bitter rise again. That old shame. That old voice that said, "You are foolish. You are weak. You will be used again." Inside the house, Ifeoma became tense. She began watching the curtains too often. Her eyes always moved to the gate whenever she heard a car slow down. Sometimes she would sit quietly and listen, like she was counting danger in the air. Zion, too, began to change. Not always. Some days he was still bright, but other days he became quieter, like a child who could feel fear even when adults tried to hide it. He would pause at the window. He would ask small questions. "Mummy, why are people always looking?" Ifeoma would smile and say, "Nothing, my son." But her hands would shake slightly as she said it. Richard saw all of it, and at times the guilt sat on his chest, because he brought them into this storm, because his name and his wealth had a way of calling trouble. But then he would look at Zion, the boy who still brought flowers, the boy who still spoke with faith, the boy who did not see a wheelchair as the end of a person. And Richard would remind himself of one thing. For once in his life, he would not run away from what was good because people wanted him to be afraid. So he stood firm. Even when his heart shook, even when the mansion felt like it was surrounded by eyes. Then one Saturday morning, the biggest storm walked into the compound wearing perfume and anger. A black SUV pulled in and stopped with sharp authority. The door opened, and Mrs. Eunice Adebayo stepped out, Richard's mother, the same woman who had begged him to find light again, the same woman he had shut out with silence and pride. But this time she did not come with pleading. She came with fury. Her wrapper was expensive, her gel was tied high. Her face was hard. She entered the living room without waiting for welcome. Her eyes swept the room and landed on Ifeoma, then on Zion, and the air turned cold. "So it is true," Eunice said, her voice sharp. "This is what you have turned my son's house into." Ifeoma stood up immediately, instinctively pulling Zion closer. Zion moved behind his mother, his small fingers gripping her wrapper as if it was the safest place on earth. Eunice looked at Ifeoma with open contempt. "What is your name?" she asked. "Ifeoma," Ifeoma replied, voice calm even as her chest tightened. Eunice Skojed. "And you," she looked at Zion, "you are living here too." Zion did not answer. He pressed closer to his mother. Eunice turned back to Richard, eyes blazing. "Richard," she said, "are you not ashamed? After everything, you now allow a poor woman and her child to enter your home like this. People are laughing. The whole estate is talking." Richard's hands tightened on his chair. Eunice's voice rose. "Is this the class you want to bring into our family? A woman that doesn't know her place? A child you picked from the roadside?" Ifeoma's cheeks burned, but she did not collapse. She lifted her chin. "Ma," she said respectfully, "I know you are his mother, but I will not allow you to speak to me as if I am dirt." Eunice stared. Ifeoma continued, voice shaking slightly but steady. "I work. I have taken nothing from your son. I cook. I clean. I manage this home. I did not come to beg. I came because my child needed safety and your son needed company." Eunice laughed without joy. "Company," she repeated, "or opportunity." Zion's grip tightened on Ifeoma. Richard saw it. He saw the fear in the boy's eyes. And something in him snapped, not with violence but with decision. For years Richard had been silent. Silent when friends left. Silent when Vivian walked away. Silent even when his mother slowly stopped visiting. But this time he refused to be silent. "Mother," Richard said, voice low and firm. Eunice turned to him. Richard's eyes did not look away. "Enough." The room froze. Eunice blinked like she couldn't believe what she heard. Richard continued, stronger now. "You came here to insult them in my house," he said. "You will not do it." Eunice's mouth opened, but Richard didn't stop. For 20 years this place has been dead, he said. I was alive, but I was not living. Zion and Ifeoma have brought peace into my home. They have brought light, and whether the estate likes it or not, I will not allow humiliation under my roof again. Not from strangers. Not from old friends. Not even from you. Eunice's eyes glistened, wounded pride mixing with something softer she didn't want to show. She looked at Ifeoma again, then at Zion. Zion stared back for a moment, then quickly hid his face. Eunice's voice dropped. You have grown stubborn, she said, turning away. Richard held her gaze. I have grown awake, he replied. Eunice stood there for a moment, breathing hard, like she was fighting herself. Then she turned and walked out. She left the mansion wounded. But as she drove away, something inside her began to shift. Because for the first time, she saw her son defend something with strength. Not pride. Not money. But conscience. Days passed. And in the middle of the noise outside, Zion kept his routine. Every morning, he would knock softly on Richard's door. So Richard, he would call, voice bright, today we try again. Sometimes he brought a flower. Sometimes he brought nothing but his smile. He would place his small hand on Richard's knee gently. He would speak like a boy who truly believed words could build miracles. Try small, he would say, even one move. At first, Richard laughed quietly. But then strange things began to happen. A warm tingling. A faint twitch. Not always. But enough to make Richard sit still and wonder if his mind was playing tricks on him. One night, as he lay in bed, he felt something like a small jump in his foot. He sat up immediately, heart racing. Was it real? Or imagination? The next morning, Richard made a decision. He would go for tests. Not because he wanted to prove Zion right, but because he needed to know if he was losing his mind. He went to see Dr. Tola Akinyemi, a respected neurologist who had heard of his case and had once reviewed his records years ago. Doctor. Tola was professional, sharp and controlled. She examined him carefully. Reflex tests. MRI. Nerve response checks. When the results came back, her face changed. Not into excitement. Into disbelief. Richard, she said slowly, this is measurable improvement. Richard's throat tightened. So it's real, he asked. Dr. Tola nodded, still staring at the report like it was insulting her science. It is unusual, she said. Very unusual. But yes, something is happening. Richard felt his chest heat up, a strange mix of fear and hope. But then Dr. Tola's eyes lifted and her tone changed. Suspicion entered her questions, careful and sharp. Richard, she said, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly. Richard's face tightened. Ask. Dr. Tola leaned forward. Is anyone tampering with your medication? Richard's eyes hardened. No. Is anyone controlling your finances? She pressed, or influencing you? Sometimes, wealthy patients become targets. People create false improvements. People manipulate stories. It happens. Richard's hands clenched. The shame tried to rise again, but this time he crushed it. I am in control of my life, Richard said coldly. If Ifeoma does not touch my medication, Zion is a child. They have done nothing except exist in this house. Dr. Tola studied him, then looked back at the results. I can't accuse without proof, she said, but you must understand why I ask. Richard's voice was controlled, but sharp. I understand, he said, but I don't accept it. Dr. Tola nodded slowly. All right, she said, we will monitor you closely. I will bring in an independent specialist to confirm. Richard agreed. But he left that hospital with anger sitting in his belly. Not because he was asked questions, but because he saw how quickly society's suspicion entered the room once a poor woman and a poor child stepped into a rich man's life. Then, like poison, the story leaked. A nurse talked. Not maliciously at first. Just carelessly. Do you know Richard Adebayo is improving? The gist moved. And when gist moves, it does not move alone. It carries lies on its back. Soon people were saying, Richard is improving because a poor woman is living with him. A poor woman and her son have taken over his house. Something is wrong there. And that was when Vivian heard it. Vivian Adebayo, the woman who left, the woman who once felt like the last rope holding him to life. Vivian heard, Richard is improving. And she heard, a poor woman is living with him. In her mind, there was only one conclusion: exploitation. Vivian didn't ask questions. She didn't come to see with her eyes. She prepared an attack. Quietly, she contacted a lawyer, gathered information, built a case. Then the lawsuit landed like thunder. Vivian filed to freeze Richard's assets. She accused Ifeoma and Zion of manipulation, of fraud, of emotional control, of manufacturing a miracle to take advantage of a vulnerable man. Tabloids exploded. Social media turned cruel. Pictures were taken from outside the gate. Zoomed images of Ifeoma hanging clothes, of Zion standing beside Richard. Headlines that didn't care about truth, only drama. Harassment became dangerous. New threats came. Some whispered. Some screamed. One night a stone hit the compound wall. Zion woke up shaking. Ifeoma held him tight, rocking him in silence. The next day, Ifeoma went to Richard with her eyes full of fear and exhaustion. Richard, she said softly, maybe we should leave. Richard looked at her. Ifeoma's voice broke. I can endure insults, she whispered, but I don't want Zion to grow up believing his existence is a crime. I don't want him to start hating himself because people hate us. Richard's chest tightened. For a moment, the old Richard, the broken one, wanted to release them, to hide again, to let the world win. But then he looked at Zion, the boy who still believed. And Richard made a choice. No, he said firmly. Ifeoma blinked. Richard leaned forward slightly, voice quiet but strong. If we leave now, they win, he said. They will prove that fear and gossip are enough to destroy anything good. I have lived in fear for too long. I will not allow Zion to inherit fear from my house. Ifeoma's tears fell quietly. Richard continued. We will face it, he said, together. And while the world shouted outside, Eunice began to watch. Not with anger anymore. With eyes that were learning. She noticed how Ifeoma worked. How she didn't wear pride like noise, but like dignity. How Zion spoke to Richard with innocent care. How Richard looked, degerent, less bitter. More alive. Eunice began to see what she had refused to see before. So quietly, without announcing it, she decided something. She would protect them. Not because society approved, but because truth had finally entered her eyes. Then the final letter came. A court summons. A date. A place. A fight that would not happen behind the mansion gate. It would happen in public. In front of reporters. In front of strangers. In front of a world that had already decided who was guilty. That night the mansion was quiet again, but not like before. Not dead quiet. This was a waiting quiet. Like a storm holding its breath. Richard sat in the living room with Ifeoma and Zion. Zion had fallen asleep on the couch, his head resting against his mother's side. Ifeoma stared at the floor, mind racing. Richard held the court papers in his hand. Then he looked up. We are about to face the whole world, he said softly. Ifeoma swallowed hard. Richard's eyes were steady. But we will not face it as enemies, he continued. We will face it as family. And in that moment, the mansion that once felt like a grave became something else. A battlefield. A home. A place where three people, once strangers, were now preparing to stand together against everything.